Welcome back to Inside Politics. Our guest today is Pat Nolan. He's the director of the Center for Criminal Justice Reform. He is a cousin of mine, in case you don't notice the family resemblance. Pat, you have a very compelling story to tell. You're part of the Nolan family. Moved to California after your grandfather was killed in the Dutchman's Bend train wreck here in Nashville in 1918. You grew up, went into politics. You became the House Minority Leader in the California Assembly. You represented the Burbank-Glendale area in Southern California. How did you go from that background to being involved in criminal justice reform? That would seem to be a little bit of a different move.
Yeah, God shifted me pretty dramatically. I was the Republican leader trying to elect a majority in the state, which was in transition, I think, politically. I was investigated and prosecuted for a campaign contribution that turned out to be part of an FBI sting.
And you felt you were guilty, but you wound up taking a
No,
plea.
I felt I was innocent.
You felt you were innocent. I should have said not guilty.
I did, because of mandatory minimums, had I been found guilty, and a survey of prospective jurors found, without hearing any facts, saying a legislator's been accused of voting for something he got a contribution for, 80% said guilty. And
you'd have been in prison for a long time.
It would have been 21 years.
And you wound up serving a little over 2, is that right?
Correct, 29 months. My children were 5 years, 4 years, and 10 months. And it was just a question of, would I roll the dice and run the risk of basically missing their entire childhood, or instead suck it up and say I did something I didn't do to limit the damage to my family, and that's the choice I took.
Your experience behind the walls was different from what you had thought you would see behind the walls, having been a legislator voting for some programs and money for the correctional system. And then you also met Chuck Colson, the former Watergate figure, who's also involved in that. Those two things changed your life, and you got involved in that issue.
Yes. In prison, I saw that what I've been told about the programs and preparing inmates, I visited many prisons as a legislator, and I got the tour, but it was sort of a Potemkin village, a phony front. The reality is there are very few programs for inmates to prepare them to get out. And I also found that it was difficult to practice my faith, not because of any animus to religion, but frankly, these are government employees who it's more work to check in volunteers, so it's easier just to turn them away. And I was taken by the chaplain to a local meeting. I was in prison in Spokane, a local meeting of supporters of the Prison Fellowship Angel Tree program that gives gifts to children of incarcerated. And I talked about the impact on my children, what a blessing it was that they were given gifts saying these are from your father and your father in heaven. And Chuck heard me speak at that. He was there at that. And on his way home, he dictated a memo saying they'd been looking for a president of Justice Fellowship, the public policy arm of Prison Fellowship. He said, I think we found our guy. He's in prison somewhere in Washington State. Track him down.
Now, you're old enough to have known Chuck Colson, his involvement in Watergate. When he first approached you, you were first approached about this, and because of his involvement, did that sort of give you a little pause? Do I want to get involved with somebody who was involved with Watergate?
No, because I believe in transformation. I really believe that he was very free at saying before he converted to Christianity, he was a mean, ruthless man. As he once famously bragged, he'd drive over his grandmother to help Nixon. But that changed. As St. Paul changed, on the road to Damascus, a man that had been killing Christians ended up the greatest proponent of the faith. So it didn't bother me at all.
When you began your work back in the 1990s, the mood in the country, and there's still something of the mood in the country today, was lock them up and throw away the key. When you talk to lawmakers today, how do you overcome that? Because right now in Nashville we have quite a problem with juvenile crime, particularly children murdering children. There's a feeling of we have to do something, and usually that sometimes comes out to be longer sentences and put them in jail and make them understand that they've done something wrong.
Well, first of all, they need to be held accountable. If they've done something awful like that, absolutely they do. The question is what it is we do with them to hold them accountable. Putting a young child in an adult facility is basically condemning them. All the studies show that they'll be in and out of the system the rest of their life. The chances of them being raped are very high. The lack of programming to help them, here they are, they haven't finished high school, and yet there's no ability to have programs.
And the lack of rehabilitation is not just while they're in the system, it's when they get out of it, when they've paid their debt to society, they've gone on parole, or they've been let out of whatever they've been in terms of correctional facility. The programs are not there either.
None. It's now there's some private programs, like here in Tennessee, the Men of Valor is a very impressive program.
Project Return is another one here in Tennessee.
Yes, Project Return, yes. And so there are things, but it's they're not government-sponsored programs. And what these young kids is, one of the people that went through a prison fellowship program said, giving up drugs was the easy part. It's giving up my old friends that was the hard part.
Now, what do you say to these lawmakers who would look back at you and say, look, Pat, you used to be a lawmaker, you know how it is. Mm-hmm. If I decide that I'm going to be for the things you're talking about, people are going to accuse me, my opponents in future races are going to accuse me of being soft on crime, and that's one of the worst things politicians think they can be called. So
yeah.
What do you arm them with to defend themselves?
That is right, but as Dr. Moore of the Southern Baptist Convention said yesterday, the public is far more understanding of the need to do something different. What we're doing isn't work. 40% of those released from prison end up back in prison for a new crime within 3 years. If you went to a hospital and 40% of the time you were still sick when you got out, you'd look for a new doctor and a new hospital. So we're looking for a new way. And we say to conservatives, there's nothing conservative about supporting a system that is hugely expensive, that doesn't transform the inmates, that doesn't help the victim. Chuck Colson said it best, only a nation that's rich and stupid would continue to put billions of dollars into a system that does not transform inmates, that leaves victims' needs unmet, and leaves communities living in fear.
Pat Nolan's our guest on Inside Politics. He's the director for the Center for Criminal Justice. He's been working here in Tennessee on that issue, and yes, he is a cousin of mine. Back to continue our conversation with Pat after this break.